They say New York's high society has the memory of an elephant and the loyalty of a jackal. Tonight, one woman is about to learn that firsthand. She's standing in a room dripping with diamonds and ambition, a ghost from a past everyone has conveniently forgotten. Her ex-husband, a tech mogul, floats by with his new fiancée, bathed in the glow of camera flashes, leaving her in a wake of cold shoulders and pitying glances. She's invisible, a nobody. But what no one in this room knows is that a secret held for 30 years by one of the world's most reclusive billionaires is about to be announced. And when it is the invisible woman they all ignored will become the most powerful person in the room. Stay tuned, because this is a story of betrayal, secrets, and the kind of epic revenge you only see in movies. The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art tasted of money. It was a metallic, crisp flavor, an undertone to the mingling scents of expensive perfume, and the floral centerpieces that were probably worth more than a down payment on a house. Ilara Vance felt it on her tongue, a flavor she had once grown accustomed to, but which now felt foreign and faintly bitter. This was the annual Starlight Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York City's philanthropic calendar. A ticket cost a staggering $50,000, a sum she'd paid herself from the modest savings she'd painstakingly rebuilt. She hadn't come to be seen. She'd come because the foundation supported arts education in underserved communities, a cause that resonated deep in her soul, a remnant of the art history major she'd abandoned 20 years ago. She wore a simple midnight blue gown by a designer no one would recognize. It was elegant, timeless, and most importantly, it allowed her to blend into the shadows cast by the room's more ostentatious displays of wealth. Her only jewelry was a pair of delicate pearl earrings, the last gift from her adoptive mother. In a sea of blinding canary diamonds and Colombian emeralds, she was a speck of dust, and that was precisely how Julian wanted it. She saw him across the room, holding court near the towering ice sculpture of a swan. Julian Croft, her ex-husband, the man she had met in a college library when he was a scholarship kid with a brilliant mind and holes in his shoes. The man she had supported working 2 jobs so he could spend 18 hours a day in their tiny apartment garage, coding the algorithm that would eventually become Omnicore, a tech behemoth that had reshaped global logistics. He looked every bit the titan of industry now. His tuxedo was bespoke, Tom Ford, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile, once a warm, genuine thing, was now a polished weapon of charisma. On his arm was Isabella Sterling, his fiancée. Isabella was 10 years younger than Elora, a model turned influencer, whose father owned a prominent real estate empire. She was draped in a shimmering, practically transparent gown that seemed to be held together by sheer audacity and strategically placed crystals. Her laughter was loud and tinkling, a sound designed to draw every eye. As Ilara watched, a pang, cold and sharp, went through her. It wasn't love. That had died a slow, painful death years ago. It was the sting of erasure. The woman who had proofread his business plans, who had brought him coffee at 3 a.m., who had sold her grandmother's engagement ring to pay for their first server. That woman was gone. In her place was this ghost haunting the periphery of a life she had helped build. A few people from their old life noticed her. There was Margaret DuPont, whose Hamptons parties they used to attend. She gave Ilara a tight, pitying smile before her eyes darted away, searching for someone more important to talk to. Then there was Robert Chen, an early investor in Omnicore. He met Ilara's gaze, his expression flickering with a brief, uncomfortable recognition before he turned his back and became deeply engrossed in a conversation about yacht maintenance. Each averted gaze, each subtle snub was a tiny paper cut on her soul. They weren't just ignoring her, they were confirming her irrelevance. She was the discarded first draft of Julian Croft's success story. The final crushing blow came as she made her way towards the bar for a glass of water something to soothe the dryness in her throat. Julian and Isabella were moving in the same direction, swept along by a current of fawning admirers. They were so close she could smell Isabella's cloying rose perfume. "Julian, darling," Isabella said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, loud enough for the surrounding cluster of people to hear. "Isn't that, what's her name? Your old charity project?" Julian's eyes flicked to Alara. For a fraction of a second, she saw something in them, not malice, but a flicker of shame, quickly extinguished. He gave a dismissive, airy wave of his hand. "Ancient history, Bella," he said, his voice smooth and dismissive. He didn't even look at Alara directly. "Some people just can't let go of the past." The circle around them chuckled politely. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just a personal jab. It was a public declaration. "She is nothing. She is beneath us." Alara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, to simply melt into the floor. She turned away, her vision blurring slightly. She found a quiet alcove near a dimly lit tapestry and leaned against the cool stone, taking a deep, shuddering breath. This was a mistake. Coming here was a terrible mistake. She had thought she was stronger, that she was past the point where their opinions could hurt her. She was wrong. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to be calm. She was Elara Vance. She was a survivor. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes of her marriage. She had a small but cozy apartment, a job as a research librarian at the New York Public Library that she loved, and a quiet sense of peace she had fought tooth and nail to achieve. She didn't need their approval. But oh, in that moment, standing alone in a room of 1,000 people, the sting of being publicly discarded by the man whose empire she had helped build was a fresh and agonizing wound. She was completely and utterly alone, or so she thought. The memory of their beginning was like a faded photograph, its edges soft and colors muted by the harsh light of the present. They had met over a dusty copy of The Wealth of Nations in the basement of the Columbia University Library. Julian was all nervous energy and raw intellect, his clothes a size too big, and his eyes burning with an ambition that both scared and thrilled her. Alara, an art history student with a passion for the Italian Renaissance, was captivated by his vision. He didn't just see code, he saw the future. Their early years were a whirlwind of shared dreams and ramen noodle dinners. They married at City Hall with 2 friends as witnesses. Their first apartment in Queens was tiny, the paint peeling and the pipes groaning, but it felt like a palace because it was theirs. While Julian coded, Alara worked. First as a barista, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to her clothes, then as a night shift waitress at a diner, her feet aching as she scribbled down orders. Every dollar she earned went into their shared account, which was really the Keep Julian's Dream Alive fund. She was the one who dealt with the landlords who paid the bills, who remembered to buy groceries. She was his editor, his strategist, his cheerleader, and his anchor. When his first potential investor demanded a working prototype that required a high-capacity server they couldn't possibly afford, Alara didn't hesitate. She took the small velvet box from her dresser, the one containing her adoptive grandmother's antique diamond ring, and walked into a pawn shop without a second thought. The $5,000 they gave her felt like $1 million. That night, when the server whirred to life, Julian had kissed her, his face streaked with tears and exhaustion. "We did it, Ellie," he'd whispered. "You did this. I'll never forget it." He did forget. The success of Omnicore wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a rising tide. First came the move to a better apartment in Brooklyn, then an office space in the Flatiron district. The ramen was replaced by reservations at Per Se. Alara quit her jobs at Julian's insistence to become a support system. She managed their social calendar, decorated their sprawling new penthouse on Central Park West, and planned the lavish parties that were crucial for networking. She learned to differentiate between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy to make small talk with venture capitalists and tech journalists. She played the part of the perfect tech mogul's wife. But in the process, Elara Vance, the woman who could spend hours debating the use of chiaroscuro in Caravaggio's work, began to disappear. Her art history books gathered dust. Her own ambitions were packed away like old clothes she no longer had occasion to wear. Julian's world became her world. The shift was subtle at first. He started staying late at the office, not out of necessity, but out of choice. The excited, collaborative conversations about the company were replaced by him giving her condescending summaries. "It's complex stuff, Ellie. You wouldn't get it." He started traveling more to conferences in Tokyo, London, and Dubai. She was invited, but it felt more like an obligation than a desire for her company. She was an accessory, like his expensive watch. The day her world finally shattered was a Tuesday in October. Julian had just returned from a tech summit in Monaco. He walked into their minimalist white-on-white living room, the one she'd painstakingly designed from the pages of Architectural Digest, and he didn't even put his briefcase down. "Elara, we need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. She knew in that instant. It was the same tone a doctor uses before delivering a fatal diagnosis. He told her about Isabella Sterling. He'd met her there. He didn't apologize. He explained. He said that he had evolved and that his life was now on a different trajectory. He used corporate jargon to describe the end of their 20-year relationship. "I need a partner who understands my world, who moves in it naturally," he'd said, looking not at her, but at the skyline, beyond their floor-to-ceiling windows. "You've been wonderful, a great foundation, but the skyscraper needs a different kind of architecture now." The cruelty of the metaphor was breathtaking. She was the foundation, buried underground, essential but invisible, while Isabella would be the gleaming penthouse, visible to all. The divorce was swift and brutal. Julian's lawyers, a team of sharks from a top Manhattan firm, painted her as a gold digger. They argued that her non-financial contributions were intangible and unquantifiable. They minimized her early sacrifices, framing them as the normal support of a spouse, not a foundational investment. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed on a whim, when they had nothing, was ironclad. She walked away with a one-time settlement that was, in the context of his billion-dollar fortune, laughably small. It was enough to buy a modest apartment and live carefully, but it was designed to be an insult. It was hush money, a severance package for a 20-year career as his wife. The 2 years since the divorce had been a quiet, painful rebirth. She'd found the job at the library, reveling in the silence and the smell of old paper. It was a sanctuary. She reconnected with 1 or 2 old college friends who hadn't been part of her and Julian's society life. She started visiting museums again, not as a social duty, but for herself. She was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding the woman she had been before Julian Croft. But the scars remained. Scars of betrayal, of being made to feel small and stupid, of being so callously discarded. Coming to the gala had been a test, a way to prove to herself that she could stand in the same room as him and his new life and feel nothing. Standing in the alcove, the memory of his words, ancient history, charity project, echoed in her mind. The test was a failure. She felt everything. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had given him her youth, her dreams, and her unwavering belief. He had taken it all, built an empire with it, and then thrown her away like the scaffolding on a finished building. As Elara composed herself in the relative quiet of the alcove, the general murmur of the ballroom began to change. A subtle shift in energy, a coalescing of attention toward the grand stage at the front of the room, indicated the evening's formal program was about to begin. The house lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the chandeliers and the bright, focused spotlights on the stage. The host, a well-known news anchor, offered some polished opening remarks before introducing the night's main event. It wasn't a performance or an award ceremony. It was an announcement, one that had been the subject of hushed speculation for weeks in the pages of the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. The keynote address was to be delivered by a representative of the Thorn Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the legendary, almost mythical industrialist Marcus Thorn. Thorn was a name whispered with a kind of reverence usually reserved for figures like Rockefeller or Carnegie. He had built his empire, Thorn Industries, from the ground up, with ventures in everything from aerospace technology to pioneering medical research. But Thorn himself was a ghost. For the last 2 decades, he had been a complete recluse, managing his vast fortune from a secluded, heavily fortified estate in upstate New York. No photos, no interviews, no public appearances. His extreme privacy had only fueled his legend. Now, word had gotten out that he was planning to announce the largest single philanthropic donation in modern history through his foundation. The entire gala was buzzing with the prospect of what that might mean. Elara felt a flicker of genuine interest, a welcome distraction from her own misery. She, like everyone, was curious about the enigmatic billionaire. A distinguished, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit walked to the podium. He had a somber, professorial air about him. A small nameplate on the lectern read Arthur Lexington Esquifo, General Counsel for Thorn Industries. "Good evening," Arthur began, his voice calm and commanding, silencing the last of the room's chatter. "I am Arthur Lexington, and I have had the profound honor of serving as Mr. Marcus Thorn's personal attorney and confidant for the past 40 years. A respectful hush fell over the audience. This was the man who spoke for the ghost. "Mr. Thorn had intended to be here tonight," Arthur continued, his voice catching slightly, "to make this announcement himself. He believed deeply in the work of the Starlight Foundation. He believed that art was not a luxury, but a fundamental language of the human soul." Elara nodded slightly. She couldn't agree more. "However," Arthur paused, taking a deliberate breath, "it is with the deepest personal sorrow that I must inform you that Marcus Thorn passed away peacefully 2 days ago at his home. He was 85 years old." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Phones immediately lit up as people began texting the news to the outside world. This wasn't just society gossip. This was a global financial event. The death of a titan like Thorn would send shockwaves through the market. Elara watched Julian from across the room. She saw him lean over and whisper urgently to the man next to him, his brow furrowed. He was already calculating, strategizing. The man's death was just a data point, a variable in a market equation. Arthur Lexington held up a hand, waiting for the room to settle. His passing was kept private at his request, to allow this evening to proceed as planned. He was a man who, above all else, valued follow-through, and his final act on this earth was to ensure the follow-through of his life's ultimate plan. The intrigue in the room was now palpable. What could be so important? For decades, Arthur said, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the 1%ers before him. The world has speculated about what would happen to Mr. Thorn's estate. Thorn Industries is one of the largest privately held corporations in the world. His personal fortune is considerable. A gross understatement. Thorn was rumored to be worth north of $50 billion. Everyone assumed he would bequeath his empire to a consortium of charities or perhaps dissolve the company. They were wrong. Mr. Thorn believed in legacy. He believed in blood. What the world never knew, what he guarded as his most precious and private secret, was that he had a child. Another shockwave, louder this time. Marcus Thorn had an heir. The reporters in the back were practically vibrating with excitement. This was the story of the century. Isabella was whispering animatedly to Julian, her eyes wide. This was drama of the highest order, the kind of thing she lived for. His heir, Arthur continued, his voice rising with gravitas, was not raised in the lap of luxury. For reasons I will not detail here tonight, they were raised in humble circumstances, unaware of their true parentage for most of their life. Mr. Thorne only reconnected with them in recent years. He discovered them to be a person of profound integrity, intelligence, and compassion. A person he knew with absolute certainty could steward his legacy, not as a fortune to be spent, but as a tool to reshape the world for the better. The tension was unbearable. Every person in that room was leaning forward, holding their breath. Who was it? Was it someone they knew? A secret love child who had clawed their way to some semblance of prominence on their own? Arthur Lexington looked down at the paper on the podium, though he clearly didn't need it. His eyes lifted, and for a strange, unnerving moment, Elara felt as though he were looking directly at her. "It is my solemn duty and my distinct honor to execute the final directive of Marcus Thorne's last will and testament," he declared. "To announce his sole heir, the new majority shareholder of Thorne Industries and the new chairperson of the Thorne Foundation, to whom he leaves his entire unencumbered estate." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was a physical thing, a taut wire about to snap. "That person is in this room with us tonight." The ballroom erupted in frantic, hushed whispers, heads swiveled, eyes scanning, searching. Then Arthur Lexington spoke the name, a name that, in that instant, shattered one world and created a new one. "Ms. Elara Vance." The two words hung in the air, seeming to disconnect from Arthur Lexington's mouth and float through the ballroom like rogue notes of music. Elara Vance. For a full 3 seconds there was absolute silence. Not a quiet reverence, but the dead, vacuum-sealed silence of collective, system-wide shock. The name was so unexpected, so completely out of left field, that the minds of New York's elite couldn't process it. They were searching their internal databases, trying to place the name with a face of importance, and coming up with nothing. Elara Vance. The librarian. The discarded ex-wife. It had to be a mistake. A different Elara Vance. Elara herself felt the name as a physical impact, a punch to the sternum that knocked all the air from her lungs. It couldn't be. She must have misheard. Her mind, already frayed with the evening's humiliation, was surely playing tricks on her. She felt a wave of dizziness, her hand gripping the cold stone wall of the alcove to steady herself. Then the second wave hit comprehension. Like a slow dawn breaking across the room, people began to connect the name to the face. Heads began to turn slowly, at first, then in a frantic, cascading rush, all pointing in one direction, pointing at her, at the woman in the simple blue dress, hiding in the shadows. The first camera flash was like a lightning strike in the dim room, blindingly white. It was followed by another and another, and then a relentless percussive barrage of flashes. The reporters, smelling the biggest story of their careers, broke from their designated area and surged forward. The sound was a deafening cacophony of clicks, shouts, and frantic questions. "Ms. Vance, Elara over here. Is it true?" Through the flickering strobes, Elara's eyes found Julian's. He was standing frozen, halfway between his seat and the aisle. His face was a mask of utter slack-jawed disbelief. The colour had drained from his skin, leaving him a ghastly pale grey. The wineglass in his hand slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor, the red wine spreading like a pool of blood. He didn't even notice. His eyes were locked on hers, and in them she saw a dawning horror so profound it was almost comical. He wasn't just seeing his ex-wife. He was seeing a ghost from his past, transformed into a financial deity, a power beyond his comprehension. Beside him, Isabella's perfectly constructed mask of social grace had crumbled. Her mouth was agape, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and raw fury. The woman she had just publicly derided as a charity project was now quite literally the most powerful and wealthy woman in the state, if not the country. Her entire social calculus, the foundation of her world, had just been blown to pieces. Elara felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were floating above her own body, watching the scene unfold. The humiliation, the pain, the loneliness of moments before. It all evaporated, replaced by a roaring, disorienting tidal wave of shock. Marcus Thorne, the recluse, her father. It made no sense. She was adopted. Her parents, a loving schoolteacher and a firefighter, had died in a car accident when she was 19. They were her parents. This was impossible. Arthur Lexington's voice cut through the chaos. Security, if you please. A team of large men in dark suits materialized, forming a protective circle around Elara's alcove with practiced efficiency. They moved with the quiet competence of men used to protecting heads of state. One of them, a tall man with a calm, weathered face, leaned in and spoke softly to her. "Ms. Vance, my name is David. We're going to escort you out of here. Please stay close to me." She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. Arthur Lexington had made his way from the stage and now stood before her, his expression a mixture of professional calm and genuine sympathy. "Elara," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. "I know this is an unimaginable shock. I have so much to explain, but this is not the place." He nodded to David, and the human wall around her began to move. They guided her through the frenzied crowd, a slow, inexorable march. The people who had snubbed her just an hour ago were now desperately trying to catch her eye, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of fawning recognition. "Elara, darling, I knew you had it in you," she heard Margaret Dupont shriek. "A brilliant move, absolutely brilliant," someone else shouted. They were like iron filings, instantly realigning themselves to a new, impossibly powerful magnet. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so shameless, it was almost breathtaking. As they passed Julian's table, he finally seemed to break out of his stupor. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Ellie," he croaked, his voice raspy with disbelief. His face was a maelstrom of confusion, regret, and a dawning, desperate fear. The entire architecture of his power, his standing in this room, had been predicated on the fact that he was the success and she was the failure. That narrative had just been violently and publicly annihilated. Elara met his gaze. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The look on her face was a blank slate, a calm void, where all their shared history used to be. For the first time, he was the one who was invisible to her. She let her security detail guide her past him, out of the ballroom, and away from the life she had known. She walked out of the Starlight Foundation Gala, not as the forgotten ex-wife, but as a woman, reborn in a firestorm of revelation, leaving the smouldering ruins of her old life and the people who inhabited it behind her forever. The ride from the museum was a silent, surreal blur. Elara was ushered into the back of a black Maybach sedan, with windows so tinted they turned the flashing lights of the paparazzi into muted, distant fireworks. Arthur Lexington sat opposite her, his hands resting on a worn leather briefcase in his lap. He remained silent, giving her space to breathe, an act of kindness for which she was profoundly grateful. They drove not to her small apartment in Yorkville, but south towards the financial district, pulling into the private subterranean garage of a sleek glass skyscraper that pierced the night sky. Thorne Tower. They rode a private elevator, all polished mahogany and silent, frictionless ascent to the penthouse floor. The doors opened directly into a sprawling apartment that was less a home and more a work of art. It was minimalist but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 360-degree panorama of Manhattan. The space was furnished with exquisite but understated pieces, and the walls were adorned with what Elara's trained eye immediately recognized as masterpieces. A Rothko here, a de Kooning there. "This was Marcus's city residence," Arthur said softly. "He rarely used it. It is yours now, of course, along with everything else." Alara walked numbly toward the window, placing a hand on the cool glass. The city lights glittered below like a fallen galaxy. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My parents. I had a mother and a father. I have their birth certificates. I have my adoption papers." Arthur gestured to a pair of soft leather armchairs. "Please, Alara, sit. Let me explain." She did, sinking into the chair as Arthur opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out legal documents, but a small leather-bound photo album. He slid it across the coffee table to her. "Your adoptive parents were wonderful people," he began. "Marcus had them thoroughly vetted. He chose them himself. They were told you were the child of a young, unwed couple who couldn't care for you. They never knew the truth. It was safer that way." Alara opened the album. The first photo was of a young woman with a radiant, defiant smile and eyes the exact shade of Alara's own. She was beautiful. "Who is this?" "That is your mother, Catherine. She was a brilliant art historian, a PhD candidate at Yale. She met Marcus when he gave a guest lecture there. They fell into a whirlwind, deeply passionate affair. He was already a powerful man, but he was also making powerful enemies in his bid to take over a rival aerospace firm. Their relationship was a secret. He explained that Catherine became pregnant. She was ecstatic, but Marcus was terrified. He had received credible threats against his life. Threats that mentioned targeting his secret little family. He was paranoid, but as Arthur confirmed, he was also right. His rivals were ruthless. "To protect you both," Arthur said, his voice heavy with the weight of the memory, "he and Catherine made an impossible choice. He arranged for your adoption through a private, completely sealed process. He created a new identity for Catherine, giving her the funds to move to Florence and live out her dream of studying Renaissance art on the condition that she never contact you. It broke both their hearts. He saw it as the only way to keep you alive and give you a normal, safe childhood." Alara stared at the photo, her mind reeling. A mother she never knew. A life in Florence. It was like a story from a novel. "Did he watch over me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Always," Arthur affirmed. "I was his proxy. I received monthly reports from a private investigator. We knew about your school plays, your grades, your friendship with the girl next door. When your adoptive parents were killed, it nearly destroyed him. I had to physically restrain him from coming to the funeral and taking you himself. But he knew revealing himself then would only add to your trauma. He let you grieve, let you find your own way, always watching from a distance." He explained that Marcus had followed her life with Julian too. He despised Julian, seeing him as a user who was extinguishing the bright spark he'd seen in his daughter. He wanted to intervene 100 times, but he was waiting for the right moment. "And then he got sick," Arthur said. "Pancreatic cancer. When he was diagnosed 2 years ago, he knew his time was short. That's when he decided to break his silence." This was the part Alara couldn't reconcile. "He never contacted me." "He did," Arthur said gently. "In a way. Do you remember about a year and a half ago, the New York Public Library received a massive anonymous donation to its Research and Preservation Department? A donation that specifically funded a new senior researcher position in art history." Alara's eyes widened. "That was my position. That's my job." "He created it for you," Arthur confirmed. "He wanted to bring you back to your first love, art. He wanted to see if that passion was still inside you. And through the donation, he met with the library's board of directors, one of whom was an old trusted friend. Through that friend, Marcus began to learn about you. Not from a PI report, but from someone who spoke with you, who saw your intelligence and your grace firsthand. A memory surfaced. An elderly board member, a kind man named Mr. Abernathy, had taken a special interest in her work. He would often stop by her desk to discuss her research. He had been so encouraging, so full of questions about her life and her thoughts. "Abernathy," she breathed. "Yes." Arthur smiled. He was Marcus's eyes and ears. He would report back after every conversation. Marcus treasured those stories. He was getting to know his daughter, and he was so incredibly proud. He pulled out one last item from his briefcase, a simple, handwritten letter. "He wrote this for you last week." Elara took the letter with unsteady hands. The handwriting was weak but elegant. "My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, then my time is over, and your new life is just beginning. I know you have 1,000 questions, and I know that my actions will seem selfish and cruel. To have stayed away, to have deprived us both of a lifetime. I have no excuse, only a reason I loved you enough to let you go. I chose your safety over my own happiness, but now I am giving you something else. Not just money. Money is a burden. I am giving you power. The power to be safe, to be independent, to be the brilliant woman I always knew you were. The world Julian Croft built for you was a cage. I am giving you the key to a kingdom. Do with it what you will. Build, create, protect, inspire. Live the life you were meant to live, not the one that was assigned to you. Forgive an old man's regrets. Know that from a distance you were the single greatest pride of my life." Your father, Marcus, tears streamed down Elara's face, silent and hot. They weren't tears of sadness or confusion anymore. They were tears of profound, earth-shattering understanding. Her entire life, every struggle, every quiet moment of resilience had been witnessed. She had not been alone. She had been loved. The secret history of her life was not one of abandonment, but of a fierce, hidden protection. She looked up at Arthur, her expression transformed. The shock was receding, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar steeliness in her eyes. "What do I do now?" Arthur Lexington gave her a small, confident smile. "Now, Ms. Thorne Vance," he said, using the name for the first time, "we get to work." The week that followed was a masterclass in controlled chaos orchestrated by Arthur Lexington. While the world's media went into a frenzy, publishing speculative articles and grainy college photos of Elara, she was ensconced within the secure bubble of Thorne Tower. Her new life arrived in a series of quiet, efficient meetings. There were investment bankers who spoke of portfolios in the tens of billions, heads of corporate divisions, who briefed her on aerospace contracts and biotech research, and the board of the Thorne Foundation, who outlined philanthropic commitments that could alter the fates of entire nations. Elara was a fast learner. The same sharp, analytical mind that could deconstruct a Renaissance painting was now absorbing financial statements and corporate structures. The research skills she had honed in the quiet stacks of the library were now deployed to understand the empire she had inherited. She was not intimidated. For the first time in over 20 years, her intellect was not being suppressed or patronized. It was being demanded, respected. She felt a part of her long-dormant awaken and stretch. She made her first official decree on day 3. She appointed Arthur Lexington as the acting CEO of Thorne Industries, a move that calmed the markets and signaled stability. Her second move was to schedule a full audit of Omnicore. It was a subsidiary of a larger tech holding company that Thorne Industries had a majority stake in, a fact Elara was sure Julian himself wasn't even aware of. The tendrils of her father's empire were everywhere. It was on Friday, a week after the gala, that the inevitable happened. Her new assistant, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Zara, buzzed her on the intercom in her new office, an office that took up the entire top floor of Thorne Tower. "Ms. Thorne Vance," Zara's crisp voice said, "Mr. Julian Croft is in the lobby. He does not have an appointment, but he is insisting he speak with you. He says it's a personal matter." Elara looked out the window at the city below. She felt a surprising calm. The frantic, humiliated woman from the gala felt like a different person. "Send him up, Zara," she said. When Julian walked into her office, he was visibly diminished. The bespoke suit was the same, but the confident, predatory swagger was gone. He looked tired, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. He took in the cavernous office, the priceless art on the walls, the sheer scale of her new reality. "Ellie," he began, his voice strained. "You look, well." "It's Elara," she corrected him coolly, not standing up from behind her massive mahogany desk. "And I'm busy, Julian. What do you want?" The coldness of her tone clearly rattled him. He was used to her warmth, her deference. I wanted to see you, to talk, to apologize for how things have been. At the gala, what Isabella said." "I've already forgotten," she said, cutting him off. "It was a lie, but it was a powerful one." She gestured to a chair. "Sit down. You didn't come here to apologize." He sat looking uncomfortable in the chair that was probably worth more than his first car. "It's Omnicore," he admitted, his composure crumbling. "We're in the middle of a Series E funding round. We need it to expand into the European market. But since the news about you, our lead investor is getting cold feet. They're worried about market stability. The audit you've called, it's making everyone nervous." Elara leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. She remembered the night she had spent proofreading his funding proposals, the passion and hope she had poured into them alongside him. "You called me a charity project, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but laced with ice. He flinched. "I didn't mean it. It was a stupid thing to say. I was trying to, I don't know, impress Isabella." "And how is Isabella?" Elara asked, a flicker of cruel curiosity in her eyes. The gossip columns had been merciless. Isabella Sterling, the fiancée of the man whose ex-wife was now exponentially wealthier and more powerful than them combined. "We're taking a break," he mumbled, looking down at his hands. "She said she needs space." Elara almost laughed. The world they had built, founded on status and public perception, was collapsing under the weight of her new reality. "Ellie, please," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "Everything I built, it's at risk. All those years of work. You remember, you were there, you helped me. That server, the one you bought with your grandmother's ring, that's the foundation of all of this." It was the worst possible thing he could have said. By reminding her of her sacrifice, he was reminding her of his betrayal. He was trying to leverage a history that he himself had desecrated. Elara stood up and walked to the window, her back to him. "You're right, Julian. I was there. I was the foundation. You said it yourself, and you taught me a very valuable lesson. Foundations are meant to be built upon and then forgotten. You don't see them, you don't thank them. You just enjoy the view from the skyscraper." She turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. "The audit of Omnicore will proceed. Thorn Industries' investment arm will be reviewing its position in your parent company. All decisions will be made based on a strict analysis of projected returns and market viability. It's not personal." She paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final devastating blow. "It's just business, and our personal business," Julian concluded 2 years ago. "Zara will validate your parking." He stared at her, speechless. He was looking at Elara Vance, but he was seeing Marcus Thorne's daughter. He saw a woman who spoke the language of power he had always craved, and she spoke it more fluently than he ever would. He had created a competitor he could never hope to beat. Defeated, he stood up and walked out of her office without another word. Elara watched him go, feeling not a sense of vengeful glee, but a quiet, profound sense of closure. The hold he had on her, the lingering sting of his betrayal, was finally gone. It had been replaced by a different kind of currency, one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with self-worth. In the months that followed, the name Elara Thorne Vance became synonymous with a new era of corporate and philanthropic leadership. She did not behave like a lottery winner indulging in yachts and lavish parties. Instead, she moved with the quiet, deliberate precision of a master strategist. The audit of Omnicore revealed what she and Arthur had suspected. Julian, in his desperate push for growth, had engaged in a series of ethically questionable practices, overinflating user engagement metrics to attract investors. Thorne Industries' legal team, acting on behalf of the parent company, forced his resignation as CEO. The news sent a small shockwave through the tech world, but it was quickly eclipsed by Ilara's next move. She installed a new highly respected CEO, stabilized the company, and refocused its mission on sustainable and ethical logistics. She didn't destroy Julian's company, she reformed it, making it stronger and more principled. It was a display of power far more sophisticated than simple revenge. Julian Croft faded from the public eye. His engagement to Isabella officially ended. He was last seen, according to a stray gossip item, flying to Southeast Asia, reportedly, to find himself. The empire he had built was still standing, but it was no longer his. He was a footnote in its history. Ilara, however, was just beginning to write her own. She poured her energy and her newfound resources into the Thorne Foundation. Her first major project was a direct tribute to the two mothers she had known: Catherine, her birth mother, and the adoptive mother who had raised her. She established the Catherine Vance Arts Initiative, the largest privately funded arts education program in the country. It provided grants for schools in low-income neighborhoods, funded scholarships for promising young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, and endowed museums to ensure free admission for all. She found the letter her father had written to her mother Catherine, the one explaining his impossible choice. She used the Thorne Foundation to establish a global network that provided legal and financial support for single mothers in crisis, ensuring no woman would have to make the same heartbreaking decision her parents did. Her public debut as the new face of the Thorne Empire was not at another glamorous gala, but at the opening of a new community arts center in the Bronx. She didn't wear a designer gown, but a simple professional dress. She stood before a crowd of local families, students and reporters, and she spoke not of balance sheets or stock prices, but of the power of a paintbrush, the hope in a line of poetry, the future in a child's imagination. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was vibrant, purposeful, and in complete command of her life. The money her father had left her was, as he had predicted, just a tool. The true inheritance was the freedom to reclaim her own narrative. One evening, she was working late in her office, reviewing a proposal for a new wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the very place where her life had been so spectacularly upended. Her assistant Zara came in. "Miss Thorne Vance, your car is ready." "Thank you, Zara," Ilara said, her eyes still on the blueprints. She paused, looking at the familiar layout of the museum. She thought of the woman in the midnight blue dress, hiding in the alcove, feeling the crushing weight of her own irrelevance. She felt a pang of sympathy for her, as one would for a character in a book read long ago. That woman's pain had been real, her humiliation acute. But it had also been the catalyst, the fire that had burned away the last vestiges of the person she was pretending to be. The strength she now wielded wasn't given to her by Marcus Thorne's will. It had been forged in the quiet indignities of her life with Julian, in the lonely years of rebuilding, in the resilience she had to cultivate just to survive. The money had not made her strong. It had simply given her strength, a platform to stand on. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the endless constellation of lights that was New York City. She was not just the keeper of Marcus Thorne's legacy, nor the ghost of Julian Croft's past. She was Ilara Thorne Vance, an architect of her own future, ready to build something beautiful and lasting on the foundation of a life that was finally completely her own. And there you have it. The story of Ilara Vance is more than just a tale of revenge. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the people who discard us. It's about how the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to the most profound discoveries about ourselves and the strength we never knew we had. Elara's journey from being an invisible ex-wife to a global force for good shows that true power isn't about money or status. It's about purpose, integrity, and reclaiming your own story. What did you think of Elara's ultimate decision regarding Julian's company? Was it the perfect revenge, or would you have done something different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening. A single sentence can shatter a world. For Isabella Rossi, that sentence was uttered over a $400 plate of seared scallops she couldn't afford by a man she thought she loved. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux, and smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Honestly, Izzy," he said, his voice a polished blend of pity and condescension. "This little coding project of yours, it's a cute hobby, but it's time to be realistic. It's never going to be your career." He didn't know that in 6 weeks, that cute hobby would make her the youngest self-made female billionaire in the country. And he definitely didn't know that the first thing she'd do with that power was buy the very company he was desperate to become a partner in. His world was about to be shattered, and she was the one holding the hammer. The restaurant was called Aurelia, a name that dripped with the kind of old-world money that Brendan Cole was born into, and Isabella Rossi had only ever observed from the outside. It was all dark mahogany, hushed conversations, and waiters who moved with the silent, ghostly efficiency of men who were paid to be invisible. This was Brendan's world. He thrived in it, navigated it with an inherited ease that Isabella, for all her ferocious intelligence, could never quite replicate. She felt the familiar prickle of being an imposter. Her dress, a simple but elegant navy sheath, had cost a week's salary. Brendan's suit, a bespoke piece from Savile Row, probably cost more than her car. They were celebrating his latest promotion at Sterling Wakefield, the private equity firm where his father was a senior partner. Brendan was now a vice president, another gilded step on a path that had been paved for him since birth. "To the future," Brendan toasted, clinking his crystal glass against hers. "And to you finally leaving that dead-end job at Innovatech." Isabella stiffened. "It's not a dead-end job, Brendan. It's a stepping stone. And Project Chimera is—" He cut her off with a placating wave of his hand. I know. Project Chimera. Your AI algorithm. It's brilliant, I'm sure, for an academic paper, but a real-world application. The market is brutal, Izzy. It's dominated by giants. Google, Goldman Sachs. They have armies of PhDs working on this stuff. And I have something they don't, Isabella countered, her voice low but firm. My model is different. It's not just predictive, it's adaptive. It learns from market sentiment, not just historical data. It can anticipate black swan events with a 7% higher accuracy rate than anything currently on the market. She had spent 3 years on it. 3 years of sleepless nights fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in her own code. It was her life's work, hidden away on a private server running simulations that were yielding results so spectacular they frightened even her. Brendan sighed, the sound of a patient parent explaining the world to a naive child. Listen to yourself. It sounds wonderful, but who's going to fund it? Who's going to take a chance on a junior analyst from a mid-tier tech firm? I'm just trying to protect you. My father has already spoken to a contact at Sotheby's. They're looking for an art history consultant. With your eye, you'd be perfect. Less stress, great connections, you can travel with me. The blood drained from Isabella's face. Art history. She had a master's degree in computational finance, another in artificial intelligence from Stanford. He was suggesting she abandon it all to become a social accessory, an intellectually stimulating companion for his high-flying life. This was the moment, the final clarifying insult in a long line of them. It wasn't just that he didn't believe in her, he actively disdained her ambition. He saw it as a character flaw, an unsightly blemish on the otherwise perfect canvas of the life he had planned for them. "You don't get it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You have never not once tried to understand what I do." "Because I understand how the world works," he retorted, his patience finally snapping. The polished veneer cracked, revealing the raw arrogance beneath. "It works on power, on connections, on capital, not on some fantasy algorithm you built in your spare time. It's a cute little project, Izzy. A hobby. Now let's be realistic. Focus on us. Focus on a life that's real." That was the sentence, the one that echoed in the cavernous silence that followed. A cute little hobby. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. She didn't see the handsome, charming man she had fallen for. She saw a gatekeeper, a man whose entire identity was built on a foundation of inherited privilege, terrified by the thought that someone, especially a woman he was supposed to possess, could build her own empire from scratch. Slowly, she placed her napkin on the table. She stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. The entire restaurant seemed to fade into a blur. "You're right, Brendan," she said, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. "It's time for me to be realistic." He smiled, relieved. "Good. I knew you'd see it my way." "My realism," she continued, picking up her small clutch from the table, "is that I am sitting across from a man who is so profoundly insecure that he has to belittle my life's work to feel powerful. My realism is that I have wasted 2 years of my life with someone who sees me as an accessory, not a partner. And my realism," she took a deep breath, "is that this is over. We are over." Brendan's face went from smug relief to crimson fury in a heartbeat. "You're throwing this away for a fantasy. You'll come crawling back in a month when you realize you can't pay your rent." A ghost of a smile touched Isabella's lips. It was a cold, sharp thing. "Don't hold your breath." She turned and walked away, leaving him sitting alone with 2 entrees, a £1, 200 a bottle of wine, and a look of pure, unadulterated shock. She didn't look back. As the cool night air of the city hit her face, she didn't feel heartbroken. She felt liberated. She felt angry. And more than anything, she felt a burning, all-consuming drive. He thought her work was a hobby. She was about to show him and the rest of the world just how powerful a hobby could be. The week following the breakup was a descent into a specific kind of hell. The emotional fallout was brutal, but it was the professional sabotage that blindsided her. Brendan, it turned out, was not a man who took rejection gracefully. He was a man who scorched the earth. Isabella arrived at her desk at Innovatech Financial on Monday morning to find her access card deactivated. Her direct manager, a perpetually stressed but generally decent man named David Chen, met her by the elevators with a pained expression. "Isabella, Arthur Finch wants to see you. Now." Arthur Finch was the CEO of Innovatech. He was a relic of a bygone era, a man who wore suspenders unironically and believed innovation was something you bought, not cultivated. Isabella had met him twice in 3 years, both times in passing. His corner office felt like a museum exhibit on 1980s corporate power. Heavy oak desk, leather-bound books that looked untouched, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed wasted on him. "Miss Rossi," Finch began, not bothering with pleasantries, "it has come to my attention that you have been using company resources for an unauthorized personal project." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Finch Project's chimera is a breach of your employment contract," he snapped. "Article 7, Section B, all intellectual property developed using company time or equipment is the sole property of Innovatech Financial. You have been running this chimera on our servers, constituting a significant security risk and a flagrant violation of policy." Isabella was floored. "With all due respect, sir, the core code was developed on my personal hardware. I've only been using the servers to run simulations against anonymized public domain market data. It poses no security risk whatsoever. David knows about my work." Finch waved a dismissive hand. "Mr. Chen is not the one who signs your paychecks. We have also received a tip from a highly respected source in the financial community." A tip. She knew instantly who it was from. Brendan. He must have called Finch over a game of golf at their exclusive country club. He would have framed it as a friendly warning, a concern for Innovatech's security, all while painting Isabella as a reckless, untrustworthy employee. The tip suggests your algorithm is not only unauthorized but potentially unstable and could expose the firm to legal liabilities. It was a perfectly crafted corporate assassination, vague, impossible to disprove, and coming from a source whose credibility Finch would never question. "That's a lie," Isabella said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "My project is sound. The simulations are flawless." "I'm not interested in your simulations, Miss Rosie," Finch said coldly. "I'm interested in protecting this company. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You will sign this non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. Our lawyers will be in touch." He slid a thick legal document across the desk. It was a gag order and a professional prison sentence rolled into one. It would prevent her from working in AI-driven finance for 2 years and from ever speaking about Project Chimera. She stared at the paper, then at Finch's impassive face. This was it. Brendan hadn't just broken up with her. He was trying to break her spirit, to cripple her career so thoroughly that his prophecy of her failure would come true. He wanted her to come crawling back, not to him, but to the life he had prescribed for her. "No," she said. Finch raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon. I'm not signing it," Isabella stated, pushing the document back across the desk. "You are firing me based on a malicious and unsubstantiated rumor. You have no claim to my intellectual property, and I will not sign away my right to work." Finch's face hardened. "You are making a grave mistake, young lady. We will litigate. We will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. Then I'll see you in court," she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. She stood up. "You don't need to have security escort me. I know the way out." The walk back to her desk was the longest of her life. The pitying stares, the whispers. She packed her small box, a photo of her parents, a worn copy of a book on neural networks, a lucky coffee mug. David Chen intercepted her by the door, his face etched with guilt. "Isabella, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell him. I showed him your progress reports. He wouldn't listen." "It wasn't your fault, David," she said, managing a weak smile. "Thank you for believing in me." "Your work. It's revolutionary," he whispered, looking around nervously. "Don't let them take it from you." That night, in her small, overpriced apartment, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. No job, dwindling savings, the looming threat of a legal battle against a multi-million-dollar corporation. Brendan's words echoed in her ears. "You'll come crawling back," she cried, a gut-wrenching, soul-emptying sob that left her feeling hollowed out. She was alone, unemployed, and about to be sued into oblivion. For a few dark hours, she let the despair win. She scrolled through job listings for positions she was wildly overqualified for, just to feel a flicker of hope. Then, around 3 a.m., surrounded by takeout containers and a profound sense of defeat, something shifted. The image of Arthur Finch's smug face, of Brendan's condescending smile, ignited a different kind of fire. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving them all wrong. She wiped her eyes, walked over to her custom-built desktop computer, her one true luxury, and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, showing lines of pristine, elegant code. Project Chimera, her creation. They thought they could take it, bury it, and bury her with it. They had no idea what it was truly capable of. For the next 2 weeks, Isabella didn't just work, she waged a silent one-woman war. She lived on coffee and protein bars. She disconnected her phone. She ignored the threatening letters from Innovatech's legal team that started piling up by her door. She poured every ounce of her energy, her genius, and her rage into the final evolution of her algorithm. She wasn't just running simulations anymore. She was preparing it for the real world. She refined the sentiment analysis module, feeding it terabytes of live news feeds, social media chatter, and political discourse. She strengthened the adaptive learning protocols, making the system so agile it could pivot its strategy in microseconds. She was building a weapon. One night, while running a final full-scale backtest against the last decade of market data, the results scrolled across her screen. The performance was staggering. If Chimera had been live during the 2008 financial crisis, it wouldn't just have avoided the crash. It would have shorted the market with such precision that an initial investment of $10,000 would have yielded over 50 million. It had predicted the dot-com bubble, the flash crash of 2010, every major market shift, with terrifying accuracy. She stared at the numbers, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a product, it was a paradigm shift. It was the key to a kingdom. But a key was useless without a door to unlock. She had the most powerful financial tool in the world and precisely $0 to implement it. Innovatech's lawsuit was coming. Her time was running out. She needed a miracle. She needed a backer with capital so vast and a risk appetite so huge that they would be willing to bet on a disgraced analyst against the entire financial establishment. She needed a ghost, and she knew of only one. A name whispered in hushed, reverent tones in the darkest corners of the tech world. A man who had vanished from public life a decade ago after his own legendary battle with Wall Street. A reclusive genius named Silas Black. Finding him was impossible. Contacting him was a fantasy. But for Isabella, fantasy was all she had left. Silas Black was more of a myth than a man. In the early 2000s, his company, Cassandra Data, had pioneered the very concept of algorithmic trading, making him a billionaire before he was 30. Then, after a brutal, hostile takeover attempt by a consortium of investment banks, an attempt he famously thwarted by liquidating their key holdings in a single afternoon, nearly crashing the Nasdaq in the process, he had simply vanished. He sold his company, took his fortune, and disappeared from the face of the earth. Rumors placed him on a private island in a fortified bunker in Wyoming, or even dead. Isabella only knew of him because of a single formative event in her academic life. During her master's program at Stanford, she had entered the prestigious Black Box Challenge, a hackathon for quantitative analysts. The anonymous sponsor of the challenge was legend, had it Silas Black himself. The goal was to design an algorithm that could find the signal in the noise of a chaotic dataset. Isabella didn't win, but she placed third. Her prize was a small scholarship and a cryptic email from a heavily encrypted address. It contained only one line. "Good work. Most people miss the ghost variable. You didn't. Keep going." She had saved the email, a digital trophy from a faceless mentor. Now it was her only lifeline. With trembling hands, she composed a new message. It was a desperate shot in the dark, an electronic prayer sent into the void. She didn't beg or plead. She laid out the facts with cold, mathematical precision. Subject the ghost variable. Project Chimera. To encrypted address. You told me once to keep going. I did. I built Chimera. It's an adaptive, sentiment-driven predictive model. It anticipates black swan events by quantifying chaotic social and political data. The ghost variables the market ignores. Backtesting shows a 92% success rate in predicting major market shifts. Beta, 0.8 48 hours in advance. I have been fired from Innovatech Financial. They are attempting to steal the IP and are suing me into silence. My ex-boyfriend, Brendan Cole of Sterling Wakefield, instigated it. I have the most powerful financial algorithm in the world. I have zero capital and about 3 weeks until I'm legally and financially buried. You fought the banks and won. They are trying to do to me what they did to you. I am not asking for a handout. I am offering an opportunity. My algorithm, your capital. Together we can do more than just make money. We can break the system. Attached is the white paper for Chimera and a single time-locked prediction for a minor, obscure commodities future set to mature in 48 hours. Proof of concept. Isabella Rossi. She attached the files, her finger hovering over the send button. It was insane. He probably wouldn't even see it. The address was likely defunct. And if he did see it, why would he care? She took a deep breath and clicked. The email vanished from her outbox, swallowed by the infinite web. For a full day, there was nothing. Silence. Isabella's fleeting hope began to curdle back into despair. She started drafting replies to the want ads for data entry clerks. The next evening, as she was microwaving a cup of noodles, her burner phone, a cheap prepaid device she'd bought for cash, buzzed. An unknown blocked number. She almost ignored it. "Hello," she answered, her voice wary. The voice on the other end was rough, gravelly, as if it hadn't been used for conversation in years. "Miss Rossi, the ghost variable in the Palladium future was the sudden union strike at the South African mine. The news broke an hour ago. The future jumped 18%. Your prediction was off by 0.2%. Isabella's spoon clattered to the floor. It was him. It had to be him. "How?" she stammered. "Your white paper is intriguing," the voice continued, ignoring her question. "Ambitious. Arrogant even. I like it. Innovatech is a third-rate firm run by a fossil. Sterling Wakefield is a den of thieves. Brendan Cole is his father's son, all pedigree, no vision. I have followed your career since the Black Box Challenge. I knew you had potential." Isabella sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak. He had been watching her. "You have two problems, Miss Rossi," Silas Black said, his voice a low rumble. "First a legal one, second a capital one. We will solve the legal problem with the capital problem. Be at the offices of Rothman, Gala and Sloan, 45th floor, tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Ask for Mr. Gala. Do not be late. And Miss Rosie." "Yes," she whispered. "Welcome to the war." The line went dead. The next morning, Isabella walked into a law office that made Arthur Finch's look like a suburban dentist's waiting room. A silent receptionist led her to a conference room with a single occupant, a severe-looking man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes. This was Michael Geller, Silas Black's personal attorney, a man known in legal circles as the Shark. "Miss Rossi," Geller said, motioning for her to sit, "Mr. Black has been most emphatic. He has instructed us to resolve your situation with what he calls maximum prejudice." For the next 5 hours, Isabella was swept into a whirlwind. Geller and his team of lawyers dissected Innovatech's case with surgical precision. They laughed at the non-compete Finch had tried to force on her. "This is unenforceable trash," Geller scoffed, tossing the document aside. "Arthur Finch is about to learn a very expensive lesson about baseless litigation." Then came the bigger plan. It was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. Silas Black wasn't interested in funding a startup. He wasn't interested in a protracted legal battle. He was interested in retribution. "Mr. Black doesn't just want to protect your algorithm. Miss Rossi," Geller explained, a predatory gleam in his eye, "he wants you to have the platform to deploy it. The best way to end a lawsuit from a company is to own the company." Isabella stared at him. "You want to buy Innovatech." "Not buy it in the traditional sense," Geller corrected. "Innovatech is a publicly traded company, albeit a small one. Its stock is undervalued, and its leadership is complacent. Mr. Black has authorized the creation of a shell corporation, Prometheus Capital, with a credit facility of $2 billion. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be quietly acquiring a controlling interest in Innovatech on the open market. It was a hostile takeover. But why? Isabella asked, bewildered. Innovatech is a dinosaur. The technology is outdated. Precisely, Gala said. It's a broken vessel, but it has the necessary infrastructure. The licenses, the regulatory compliance, the trading floor. It's cheaper and faster to buy the vessel and replace the engine than to build a new ship from scratch. And the engine is Project Chimera, and you, Miss Rossi, will be the new captain. The plan was set in motion with breathtaking speed, while Isabella worked with Gela's tech team to secure Chimera on unbreachable servers. A team of traders working from anonymous offices in Zurich and Hong Kong began buying Innovatech stock. They bought in small, untraceable blocks, careful not to trigger any alarms. The stock price began to creep up, but so slowly that market watchers attributed it to random volatility. Meanwhile, Arthur Finch, oblivious, was smugly proceeding with his lawsuit, burning through company cash, to harass Isabella with legal notices. Brendan Cole, at Sterling Wakefield, was likely celebrating his victory, confident that he had successfully neutralized his upstart ex-girlfriend. They were all celebrating on the deck of a ship that was unbeknownst to them being bought out from under their feet. 2 weeks later, Gala called Isabella. "We have it," he said, his voice calm but triumphant. "As of 5 minutes ago, Prometheus Capital owns 51% of Innovatech Financial's outstanding shares. According to SEC regulations, we are required to announce our position and can call an emergency meeting of the board to vote on new leadership. The meeting is set for Monday. Monday, the day of reckoning." Isabella felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. Just weeks ago, she was packing her belongings in a cardboard box. Now, she was the majority shareholder of the company that had fired her. "What do I do now?" she asked Gala. "Now," Gala replied, "you go buy a suit, Miss Rossi. The kind of suit that says, 'I own this room.' On Monday, you're not just getting your job back, you're taking his." The Monday of the emergency board meeting dawned grey and overcast, the sky a blanket of steel over the city. It suited Isabella's mood perfectly. She wasn't nervous. She was a live whale humming with a focused, cold energy she hadn't known she possessed. The suit Gala had advised her to buy wasn't just a suit. It was armor. A custom-tailored, charcoal grey pantsuit by a designer whose name she couldn't pronounce. It was understated, severe, and screamed power. She arrived at the Innovatech Tower at exactly 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the meeting. She wasn't accompanied by Gela's team. They were already upstairs preparing the ground. She walked in alone. The security guard at the front desk, a man who had watched her leave in disgrace weeks earlier, did a double take. "Miss Rossi, you're not on the visitor list." Isabella met his gaze without blinking. "I won't be a visitor for long. Call up to Arthur Finch's office. Tell them Isabella Rossi is here." She enjoyed the flicker of confusion and panic in his eyes as he made the call. She waited perfectly still, a statue of impending doom in the marble lobby. Upstairs, in the 50th floor boardroom, the atmosphere was one of confused irritation. Arthur Finch sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his face florid with indignation. The board members, a collection of aging men in expensive suits, murmured amongst themselves. The only outsider present was Brendan Cole, who Finch had invited as a special consultant to discuss market strategy, a thinly veiled reward for his tip-off. Brendan looked smug, relaxed, the cat that got the cream. "I still don't understand the meaning of this, Michael," Finch grumbled at Michael Geller, who sat calmly at the opposite end of the table with 2 junior lawyers. "An emergency meeting called by a shell company nobody has ever heard of, Prometheus Capital. This is a disruption of our quarterly planning." "All will be made clear, Arthur," Geller said smoothly, We are just waiting for the new majority shareholder to arrive. A new majority shareholder. A ripple of shock went through the room. Brendan's smug expression faltered slightly. He leaned over to Finch. "Did you know about this?" he whispered. Finch just shook his head, looking bewildered. Just then, Finch's personal assistant burst into the room, her face pale. "Mr. Finch, sir, there's a woman here to see you. She's in the lobby. Isabella Rossi." The name hung in the air like a foul odor. Finch's face contorted in disbelief, then rage. "What? What is that insolent girl doing here? Did she come to beg for her job back? Have security remove her from the building immediately." Brendan Cole laughed a short, ugly bark. The audacity. Some people just don't know when they're beaten. Gala raised a hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Arthur." "And why the hell not?" Finch sputtered. Because, Gala said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You would be removing the single largest owner of this company, the principal of Prometheus Capital, your new boss." The silence in the room was absolute profound. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. The board members stared at Gala as if he'd just started speaking in tongues. Brendan Cole's face had frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the color draining from his cheeks. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The boardroom doors swung open. Isabella walked in. She didn't look at Brendan. She didn't look at the stunned board members. Her eyes were locked on one person, Arthur Finch. She walked the length of the table with a steady, unhurried pace, her heels clicking a death knell on the polished hardwood floor. She stopped, not at the side of the table, but at the empty chair right next to Finch's at its head. She placed her leather portfolio on the table. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and steady, amplified by the room's shocked silence. "Arthur, you're in my seat." Finch stared at her, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, fury, and dawning horror. This is a joke, a prank." Gala cleared his throat. "It is my duty to inform the board," he announced formally, "that as of Friday, 17:00 hours, Prometheus Capital, a firm wholly controlled by Ms. Isabella Rossi, has acquired 51.7% of Innovatech Financial. All necessary filings have been submitted to the SEC. We have the votes. The first order of business for this meeting is a motion to remove Arthur Finch as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board, effective immediately." One of Gala's associates began passing out documents to the stunned board members. The numbers were all there in black and white, irrefutable. Brendan finally found his voice. It was a strangled, disbelieving whisper. "Izzy, how? What is this?" She finally turned her head and looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred, just a vast, chilling indifference. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture, a background object that has ceased to be of any importance. "It's called a hostile takeover, Brendan," she said simply, as if explaining a basic concept. "It's what happens when you underestimate your competition. You of all people should know that." She then turned her attention back to Finch, whose face was now a dangerous shade of purple. "The motion to remove Mr. Finch from his positions. All in favor?" Gala's hand shot up. Prometheus Capital votes aye with its entire 51.7% block. The other board members, seasoned veterans of corporate warfare, knew a lost cause when they saw one. Their loyalty was to their stock options, not to a deposed king. One by one, their hands went up. The vote was unanimous. Finch slammed his hand on the table. "This is an outrage, a travesty I built this company. You ran it into the ground," Isabella countered, her voice cutting through his tirade. "You relied on legacy systems, cronyism, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the future of finance. This company has been stagnant for a decade. That ends today." She looked at Gala. "Second motion. A motion to appoint Ms. Isabella Rossi as the new Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of the Board," Gala announced. Prometheus Capital votes aye. It was a formality. In the space of 10 minutes, Isabella Rossi had gone from being a fired, disgraced analyst to the absolute ruler of the company that had cast her out. She stood up and walked to the head of the table as Finch, sputtering with impotent rage, was gently but firmly escorted from the room by Gala's associates. She looked at the faces around the table, shocked, wary, fearful. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice resonating with newfound authority. "The era of complacency at Innovatech is over. We are no longer a follower. We are a predator. We will be implementing a new proprietary trading algorithm that will render every single one of our competitors obsolete. The name of that project is Chimera." She let the name sink in. "Some of you will adapt to this new reality. You will thrive. Those of you who resist change, who cling to the old ways, will be rendered redundant. Your positions will be eliminated." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room until it landed finally on Brendan Cole. He looked physically ill, ashen-faced and trembling. "Oh, and Mr. Cole," she said, her voice laced with ice, "thank you for your consultancy. Your services are no longer required. Security will see you out." She watched as he was led from the room, not with rage, but with a kind of detached pity. He wasn't a villain anymore. He was just irrelevant, a footnote in her story. Isabella Rossi, 28 years old, stood at the head of the table in the boardroom of the company she now owned. She wasn't just the CEO. Thanks to the valuation of Chimera, which Silas Black's accountants had pegged in the low 10 figures, she was on paper the youngest self-made female billionaire in the nation. She looked out the panoramic window at the sprawling city below. It wasn't his world anymore. It was hers, and she was just getting started. The first 24 hours of Isabella's reign were a masterclass in controlled demolition and strategic reconstruction. The news of the hostile takeover and her appointment as CEO sent shockwaves through the financial industry. The headline in the Wall Street Journal read, "Fired and Analyst 28 buys company, becomes tech's newest billionaire." The story was sensational, but it barely scratched the surface of the silent, swift revolution happening inside the Innovatech tower. Her first act as CEO was to call a company-wide all-hands meeting in the main atrium. The employees gathered a sea of anxious and curious faces. They were expecting a bloodbath. They were expecting a vengeful tyrant. Isabella walked onto the small stage, not with a cohort of lawyers, but alone. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked young, almost startlingly so, under the harsh corporate lighting. She tapped the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Isabella Rossi. As of yesterday, I am your new CEO. I know there are a lot of rumors and a lot of fear, so let's dispense with the mystery. Yes, I used to work here as a junior analyst, and yes, I was fired." A murmur went through the crowd. This was unprecedented honesty. "I was fired," she continued, "because I was building something new, something that the old leadership was too afraid or too blind to understand. That something is Project Chimera, and it is the future of this company, our future." She laid out her vision, not with corporate jargon, but with passion and clarity. She spoke of turning Innovatech from a lumbering dinosaur into a sleek, agile fintech predator. She spoke of innovation, of meritocracy, of rewarding talent over tenure. "For years, your ideas have been stifled by bureaucracy. Your talents have been wasted on outdated systems. That ends now," she declared. "I am not here to punish the past. I am here to build the future. If you are passionate, if you are talented, and if you are willing to work harder than you have ever worked before, you have a place here. If you are here to just collect a paycheck and wait for retirement, I suggest you update your resume." Then came the first of her gambits. "Effective immediately," she announced. "I am dissolving the entire senior management layer directly under the CEO. All departmental vice president positions are hereby vacated. Gasps rippled through the atrium. It was a corporate decapitation. In their place, she continued, I will be promoting from within, based on one criterion alone, merit. I've spent the last 3 years watching you work. I know who the real innovators are. I know who the dead weight is. Her eyes scanned the crowd and found a familiar, anxious face. David Chen, where are you? David, her former manager, looked terrified as he hesitantly raised his hand. David, Isabella said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. You were the only manager who believed in my work. You protected it as long as you could. You understand what's coming. I'm promoting you to Chief Technology Officer. Your first task is to assemble a team to integrate Chimera into our core systems. You have an unlimited budget. Get it done. David Chen stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of utter shock before a slow, dawning grin spread across it. A wave of energy of possibility surged through the employees. It wasn't a bloodbath. It was a revolution. Throughout the day, Isabella moved with ruthless efficiency. She walked the floors, not with an entourage, but by herself. She had quiet conversations with coders, with junior traders, with administrative assistants. She remembered their names, their projects. By day's end, a new leadership team was in place, comprised of the company's brightest and most overlooked talents. The old guard, the cronies of Arthur Finch, were gone. Late in the afternoon, her assistant, a sharp young woman she'd promoted from the reception pool, informed her she had a visitor. A Mr. Brendan Cole is in the lobby. He insists on seeing you. He says it's personal. Isabella felt a flicker of something, not anger, but a weary finality. Send him up, she said. Brendan entered her new office. Arthur Finch's old office, now stripped of its heavy dark furniture and replaced with minimalist glass and steel. And he looked like a broken man. His bespoke suit was rumpled. His face was pale and drawn. The swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out look. Izzy, he began, his voice raspy. I had to see you. I can't believe this. Isabella remained seated behind her vast new desk. She didn't offer him a seat. Brendan, I came to apologize, he said the words, sounding foreign and clumsy in his mouth. What I said, what I did, it was unforgivable. I was a fool. I was arrogant. And I was jealous. Yes, Isabella agreed, her tone neutral. You were. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. My father is... He's furious. Sterling Wakefield is one of Innovatech's biggest clients. He says I've ruined the relationship. I've been suspended. My career is over, Izzy. He was looking for something. Absolution, pity, a lifeline. He was trying to appeal to the woman. He thought he knew the Izzy who would be swayed by his pain, but that woman was gone. Your career is not my concern, Brendan, she said, her voice as cool and hard as the glass of her desk. You made a series of choices. You chose to belittle me. You chose to sabotage me. You chose to align yourself with a failing system because it was comfortable and familiar. These are the consequences of your choices. Tears welled in his eyes. But we loved each other. Doesn't that mean anything? Isabella leaned forward slightly. You loved the idea of me, Brendan. You loved the version of me that fit into your world. The moment I tried to build my own world, you tried to burn it down. That isn't love. It's possession. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. The work I am doing here is going to change the face of finance. I have a company to run. I'm afraid I don't have time for this. She turned and looked out the window at the city stretching out below her. It was a dismissal, more profound and complete than any firing. Defeated Brendan turned and walked out of the office, a ghost from a life she had already left behind. She heard the door click shut. She didn't turn around. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet, clean sense of closure. He was a problem that had been solved. Her phone buzzed. A text from an encrypted number. It was from Silas Black. Gala tells me the old guard has been purged. Good. Now the real work begins. Chimera is hungry. It's time to feed it. Don't get distracted by the noise. Your only loyalty is to the future. Isabella smiled. He was right. The past was settled. The future was a blank page, and she held the pen. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The passage of 6 months had not just changed Innovatech Financial. It had forged it into an entirely new element on the periodic table of Wall Street. The old sleepy firm was a distant memory, a fossil preserved in amber. The new Innovatech was a place of breathtaking velocity, a symphony of quiet intensity. The open-plan floors, once a landscape of cubicle farms, were now collaborative pods centered around holographic data streams. The currency here wasn't tenure or titles, it was ideas and execution speed. Isabella had fostered a culture that felt less like a bank and more like a mission control center for the future of capital. A perfect example was playing out on the main screen in her office, a vast expanse of transparent aluminum that dominated one wall. It was 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the closing bell. Innovatech was in the midst of a silent, high-stakes duel with Goliath National Bank, the oldest and most arrogant titan of the industry, over a massive block of shares in a biotech firm that had just announced a breakthrough. Goliath's traders, using traditional models, were selling short betting. The announcement was a speculative bubble that would pop. Chimera, however, had seen something else. It had cross-referenced the clinical trial data with an obscure materials science journal, noting that the new drug's delivery mechanism relied on a polymer whose sole patent holder had just been quietly acquired by a tech conglomerate. It wasn't just a drug breakthrough, it was a vertically integrated manufacturing pipeline in the making. Chimera hadn't just seen the signal, it had understood the entire ecosystem around it. They're still shorting, David Chen said, standing beside Isabella. He looked less like a TO and more like an excited kid with the world's best video game. They think we're insane. Let them, Isabella said, her eyes fixed on the cascading numbers. Insanity is just a vision they can't comprehend yet. At precisely 4:10 p.m., the closing bell rang. A moment later, a news alert flashed across the wire. The tech conglomerate confirmed a multi-billion-dollar partnership with the biotech firm. The stock didn't just rise, it went supernova. Goliath National lost an estimated $900 million in a single afternoon. Innovatech, thanks to Chimera's foresight, had netted over $1 billion. It was just another Tuesday. This kind of success had made Isabella Rossi a legend, but it also made her a target. The industry, terrified of what it couldn't understand, began to fight back. Rivals tried to poach her staff with astronomical offers they all refused. Whispers of illegal insider trading circulated, prompting a discreet SEC inquiry that found nothing because there was nothing to find. Chimera wasn't cheating, it was just playing a different game entirely. The most persistent thorn in her side was a man named Nathan Pierce, a Pulitzer-winning journalist for the New York Ledger. Pierce was old-school cynical and smelled a rat. He didn't believe in magic bullets, and he saw Isabella as a financial warlock who needed to be exposed. His weekly columns were a masterclass in insinuation, painting her as a reckless gambler, a stooge for some hidden benefactor, or a fraud whose luck was about to run out. The rise of Isabella Rossi and Innovatech isn't a fairy tale, he wrote in his latest piece. It's a black box, and history teaches us that black boxes on Wall Street are never filled with miracles. They are filled with secrets, and those secrets eventually rot the entire system. Isabella read his column on her tablet as she sat in the back of her car, gliding through the city's neon-drenched streets toward her apartment. She should have been angry, but she mostly felt a strange sense of weariness. Pierce, like Brendan, like Finch, was another man trying to fit her into a narrative he understood. They couldn't accept that the phenomenon was simply a brilliant woman and her even more brilliant creation. The cost of this constant battle was her isolation. Her penthouse apartment was a marvel of minimalist design and smart home technology, a sterile paradise with views that could make an emperor weep. But it was also an empty fortress. Her friends from before her meteoric rise struggled to relate to her new reality. Dating was impossible, a minefield of sycophants and gold diggers. Her life had become her work, and her only true confidant was David Chen. It was during one of their late-night work sessions that the next chapter truly began. David had been running a deep learning protocol, allowing Chimera to search for patterns beyond the financial markets. The results he brought to her were staggering and terrifying. "It's not just supply chains, Isabella," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "It's everything. Based on atmospheric data, ocean temperatures, and deforestation rates, Chimera is predicting a catastrophic crop failure in Southeast Asia within 18 months, a famine that will affect 50 million people. It's also identified 5 coastal cities that are structurally unprepared for the sea level rise predicted over the next decade. It's mapping the future of human suffering." They stared at the data, at the cold, hard projections of impending disaster. All the money they had made, all the rivals they had crushed, suddenly felt meaningless. They had created a crystal ball, and it was showing them a vision of hell. "We can't just sit on this," Isabella whispered, the weight of the information pressing down on her. "We can't just use this to short agricultural futures. It's monstrous." This was the moment her ambition crystallized into purpose. The power they held wasn't for accumulating wealth, it was a tool for intervention. "We're going to create a new division," she declared, the idea taking shape with electrifying clarity. "A non-profit arm of the company. We'll fund it with 10% of Innovatech's quarterly profits. We're going to build early warning systems and give them to governments for free. We're going to preemptively invest in drought-resistant crops and fund their distribution. We're going to finance the seawalls those cities need before the floods come. We won't just predict the future, we'll protect it." They called it the Atlas Initiative, a name that signified the immense burden they were choosing to lift. The announcement of the Atlas Initiative was met with confusion by the street and cynicism by critics like Nathan Pierce, who dismissed it as a clever PR stunt to deflect regulatory scrutiny. But for Isabella, it was the only thing that mattered. A week later, a simple, unmarked cardboard box arrived at her office. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single leather-bound first-edition copy of a treatise on modern neural networks, the very book she had packed in her box on that humiliating last day at the old Innovatech. Tucked inside was a note on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the handwriting a strong, angular script. "Isabella, they will always mistake the architect for a gambler. They will always fear the tools they cannot comprehend. I once built a machine to see the future. I used it to win a war, and then I walked away. You have built a machine to save the future. Do not make my mistake. Do not walk away. The world needs its architects." The ghost in the machine is proud. SB. Isabella held the book, the heavy paper of the note cool against her fingers. It was more than an acknowledgement. It was a charge, a warning, and a blessing from the only person on the planet who could truly understand the path she was on. She looked from the book to the flowing data on the screens, then out the window at the city below. The journey had been forged in the fires of betrayal and humiliation. She had been dismissed, underestimated, and cast out. Brendan Cole was a faded memory, a cautionary tale. Arthur Finch and Nathan Pierce were just voices from an old world, their skepticism the dying echo of an obsolete era. Her story had never truly been about revenge. Revenge was a closed loop, a snake eating its own tail, Her story was one of creation, of building something where nothing existed before. She hadn't just bought a company, she had given it a soul. She had built an empire, not of money, but of purpose. And as she stood there, the architect of tomorrow holding a message from the ghost of yesterday, she knew with absolute certainty that her life's work, the cute little hobby that had sparked a revolution, was ready for its grandest, most important task. What an incredible journey of resilience, intelligence, and ultimate triumph. Isabella Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Her refusal to be broken, her unwavering belief in her own vision, and her transformation of personal pain into world-changing power is an inspiration to anyone who has ever been underestimated or told their dream was just a hobby. What did you think of Isabella's epic comeback? Was her takeover ruthless or justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story as motivating as I did, please give this video a huge thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear that their ambition is valid and their dreams are worth fighting for. And of course, if you want more stories of incredible underdogs who change the game, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for listening.